Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be getting into a really fascinating, honestly kind of urgent topic today about the workforce, demographic shifts, and what the United States can learn from what's already happening in places like Japan and South Korea. But kick things off, I want to read something verbatim to you just to set the stage. I was scrolling through LinkedIn the other day and came across a post from a local trade school recruiter. He was practically beaming, sharing a series of photos of young guys in work boots and high-vis vests, captioned with a triumphant, "The tool belt generation is here." He talked about how his enrollment was exploding and how four-year degrees were becoming relics of the past. To him, the surge in trade interest wasn't just a trend. It was a total victory, a sign that the next generation had finally seen the light. But then I did something a bit annoying. I brought up a demographic cliff. I mentioned the well-documented 13% drop in high school graduates hitting us by 2025 because of the birth rate crash during the Great Recession. The change in his demeanor was fascinating. When the media talks about this cliff, they paint a picture of empty ivy-covered halls and abandoned dorms, framing it as an exclusive crisis for higher education. But as I pointed out that a cliff for colleges is also a cliff for trade schools, and for the 250,000 new shipbuilding jobs the government is trying to fill, the recruiter's smile didn't just fade. It turned into a look of genuine confusion. He'd been told a story where the trades were somehow immune to the reality of having fewer human beings. It made me realize that we've been sold a very specific, one-dimensional disaster movie. We're so obsessed with the death of the university that we've completely ignored the much larger, silent labor cliff looming behind it. The contradiction is glaring. How can one sector be surging while the entire pool of available humans is shrinking? As it turns out, the cliff might not be the vertical drop-off we've been led to fear, and the victim certainly isn't who you think it is.
Yeah, that interaction, it perfectly encapsulates the entire blind spot we have in this country right now. We are just so incredibly focused on this cultural narrative of, higher education versus the trades.
Right, the whole blue-collar versus white-collar thing.
Exactly. And because of that, we are completely missing the actual math. The sheer arithmetic of what happens when a population just stops having as many kids.
And to really understand what that looks like on the ground, I want to take us over to Tokyo. Because I was reading this story about a guy named Hiroshi. He's a third-generation machine shop owner in Oda City. And if you know anything about Oda City, it's basically the beating heart of Japan's precision engineering.
Yeah, those are the tiny little workshops that actually built the Japanese post-war economic miracle. They make the microscopic parts for, medical devices and robotics.
And Hiroshi's been doing this for 40 years. He's a master at it. His machines are state-of-the-art. He has plenty of orders coming in. But his biggest problem isn't a competitor across town. It's a birth certificate. He literally walks out onto his factory floor, and the stools are just empty.
The silence of it, that's the labor cliff right there.
It's eerie. The neighborhood is just quiet because there are no apprentices. He cannot find a single young person to come in and learn how to calibrate a lathe. And his perspective is so different from what we hear in the U.S. media. We're worrying about rural liberal arts colleges shutting their doors. Hiroshi is terrified that the literal making of things is just evaporating.
And that's such a profound irony, isn't it? We've built these incredibly advanced societies where we have plenty of people writing poetry or, analyzing social media trends, but the people who actually know how to fix the pipes or calibrate the machines are disappearing. We put all this prestige into the classroom, and meanwhile, civilization's workshops are literally gathering dust.
It's terrifying when you frame it like that. But then, to play devil's advocate, I look at the U.S. media. You read places like The Hustle or Validated Insights, and they are constantly running these victory laps about the tool belt generation.
Absolutely. The narrative is everywhere.
You see double-digit enrollment increases in mechanic courses, repair, construction, culinary arts. Young people are looking at the price of a university, which is, twice as expensive for public schools, and up to 10 times for private compared to trades. And they're making a purely financial choice. They go to a trade school, and they are significantly more likely to actually work in their field of study than someone with a sociology degree.
Which is fantastic for those individuals. The desire to go into the trades is absolutely surging. But, and this is the massive contradiction that your LinkedIn recruiter couldn't grasp, you cannot outtrend demographics.
Right, because the percentage of kids choosing trades is going up.
But the total number of kids is dropping rapidly. The U.S. birth rate peaked around 2007. We had about 4.3 million births. Things were great. The housing market was booming. Then 2008 happens. the Great Recession.
The bottom falls out.
Exactly, and the birth rate crashes. We had this massive birth dearth where births dropped to roughly 3.6 million, and they've stayed low. Well, you roll the clock forward 18 years from 2007 and 2008, and you land right in the middle of the 2020s. Right now, those babies that weren't born are now the 18-year-olds who aren't graduating high school.
So that creates this incredible headwind for the entire economy, not just colleges.
It's a labor cliff. I mean, look at the White House Bruce and the reports from the Illinois CPA Society. We are already seeing the shortages before the cliff has even fully hit. We are short something like 500,000 construction workers today.
500,000. Just gone.
We need over 600,000 auto technicians. We have 800,000 open manufacturing jobs. And my favorite example, because it shows how serious this is the military. The U.S. Navy needs 50,000 workers just to build the next generation of nuclear submarines.
50,000 workers just for submarines. So when the government is trying to fill 250,000 new shipbuilding jobs across the board, they aren't just competing against colleges. They are competing against the laws of mathematics.
Right. You can increase trade school enrollment by 20%, but if the total pool of 18-year-olds is shrinking by 13%, you are still fighting over a shrinking pie. The recruiter on LinkedIn is cheering for his own slice, oblivious to the fact that the bakery is running out of flour.
Which brings us back to Japan, because they are basically the ghost of Christmas future for the United States.
They are fully realized in their labor cliff. It's not a prediction for them. It's their daily reality.
I was looking at their working age population data. The 50 to 64 demographic is dropped below 60% of the total population.
And you feel that in every sector. Look at their construction sites. They have 4.6 job openings for every single applicant.
That is just insane. So 5 companies are basically fighting over one person with a hard hat.
Exactly. And the result is that nationwide infrastructure projects are just slowing down. They can't build or repair things fast enough. But it's not just the heavy industry. It hits the care economy, too. In the first half of 2025, 22 childcare centers closed in Japan.
And not because parents couldn't afford it.
Right. They closed because there simply were no children. Japan's fertility rate is down to 1.15, so you have these nursery closures alongside a massive labor shortage. Hiroshi's empty machine shop is exactly where the American machine shop is heading if we don't start managing this cliff.
And how a country manages it really seems to depend on how the media frames the problem, which leads into a fascinating story out of South Korea. I want to talk about this young woman in Seoul, Ji-won. She represents what they're calling the U-turn generation.
Yes, the U-turn phenomenon.
So in South Korea, the pressure to get into a top university is legendary. They have the SKY universities, Seoul National, Korea, and Yonsei. It's the ultimate golden ticket. And Ji-won did everything right. She bought into the media narrative that shrinking universities were a tragedy. She fought hard, got her 4-year degree, and graduated.
And then hit a brick wall.
A total desert. The media was crying about the educational cliff and empty lecture halls, but Ji-won realized the real cliff was the job market for office workers. There were thousands of graduates just like her, competing for a handful of corporate desks.
Because the economy didn't need that many generalists.
Exactly. So she does this radical pivot. After getting a 4-year degree, she enrolls in a specialized vocational college to learn semiconductor equipment maintenance.
Brilliant. She looked at the labor cliff and realized it wasn't a crisis, it was a ladder. If you have the practical skill, you have the leverage.
But the social stigma she faced was intense. Her parents were incredibly ashamed at first that she was going into manual labor after getting a university degree. But she had this great quote. She said, "The prestige didn't pay the rent, but the specialized skill made me indispensable."
That is such a powerful realization. And it really highlights a generation of overeducated, underemployed youth who are literally having to restart their lives because their society was so completely obsessed with university prestige.
And that obsession is heavily driven by how the media talks about demographics. There's a really interesting study from Lund University that compared media narratives between the West and East Asia.
The contrast is night and day. In the US and Western Europe, the media overwhelmingly uses this neoliberal framing.
Right, so we focus on competitiveness, we talk about the death of the university and worry about the financial viability of these colleges. We view a drop in 18-year-olds as a crisis for institutions. Like, how will this private college survive without tuition dollars?
We treat it like a business problem, a customer shortage. But if you look at the media in Japan and South Korea, they don't care if a college goes bankrupt. They frame the demographic drop as an existential threat, a matter of national security.
Yeah, South Korean media literally uses the phrase national extinction. They run stories about the collapse of the defense budget because there aren't enough young men to staff the military. They focus on the welfare state, on who is going to pay the pensions. It's about the survival of the economy itself.
Because they've seen the consequences of ignoring it. South Korea is suffering from what economists call the golden ticket syndrome.
Let's unpack that because the numbers out of the KEI and SNESCO reports are staggering.
South Korea has built the ultimate education bubble. Over 70% of their high school graduates go on to tertiary education. 80% of teenagers plan to get a degree, and 90% of parents want them to. It is pure credentialism.
Where the degree is the only acceptable measure of human worth.
Exactly. And when everyone has a degree, you get massive education inflation. Jobs that historically only needed a high school diploma suddenly require a bachelor's degree.
The example in the research that blew my mind was cosmetology. You have people going into hair and makeup, and now there are 4-year degree programs competing with 2-year degrees for cosmetology.
It's an incredible misallocation of resources. You end up with high youth unemployment despite having the most educated youth population on Earth. And this economic pressure has birthed this Sampo generation.
Right, the generation giving up on 3 things: courtship, marriage, and childbirth. Because the economic pressure of this mismatch is just too heavy.
And while all these highly educated young people are stuck in this holding pattern, waiting for a prestigious job at Samsung or LG, 40% of small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, are facing severe labor shortages.
So the small factories are desperate for workers, and the coffee shops are full of unemployed graduates with bachelor's degrees.
That is the U-turn phenomenon in a nutshell. G1 isn't an isolated case. You have university graduates returning to vocational schools because they finally realized the golden ticket was a mirage. It didn't open any doors.
And when you contrast that with the U.S., our discussion is just so fragmented. We celebrate trade school growth in one headline, and then we mourn college closures in another. And we rarely connect them to the single root cause, which is the birth rate crash.
Our labor cliff is currently masked by this happy narrative of a trade school victory, whereas in Korea, their crisis is fully exposed by the total failure of the university for everyone model.
So how do we actually adapt to this? Because clearly just letting the media argue about it isn't fixing the structural issue. I want to bring up Mr. Miller. He's a high school guidance counselor in a manufacturing hub in Michigan.
Mr. Miller is a great example of the American approach, which is largely market-driven.
Right. He's sitting in his office reading these national reports about the enrollment cliff. But outside his window, the local trade school's waiting list is growing. He views the demographic shift not as a cliff, but as a reality check. It's forcing a necessary conversation.
Because the market forces are getting too loud to ignore, local factories in his area are offering signing bonuses for industrial automation skills that rival corporate entry-level salaries.
So the strategic students are looking at that, and they are bypassing the debt-heavy university route entirely.
And in a way, the U.S. is accidentally mirroring the resilient strategies of Japan and Korea. We are shifting toward a more grounded, functional economy. Even though it kind of hurts our traditional sense of limitless American optimism, it's a necessary correction.
But it's an accidental strategy, right? We're just letting wage spikes steer the ship. When you look at East Asia, they are taking strategic adaptation to a whole different level. Let's talk about South Korea's Meister high schools.
The Meister schools are brilliant. They are modeled directly after the German vocational system. And the key difference is that the curriculum is developed jointly with industry.
So the companies that need the workers are literally writing the textbooks.
They boast a 90% employment rate for graduates for 5 consecutive years. Plus, the government provides these work-study dual programs. It allows students to completely skip the education bubble and enter the workforce with highly specialized skills immediately.
Japan is doing something similar with their professional and vocational universities, the PVUs.
Right. They established those in 2019 to bridge the gap. The goal is to provide deep theoretical knowledge alongside intense practical skills. They are directly challenging that old academic vocational divide.
Because they have to. With their 18-year-old population dropping by 26% in just 8 years, Japan simply cannot afford to have graduates who aren't work-ready on day one.
And education is just one pillar. The other 2 are automation and immigration. Japan is pouring massive investments into robotics, especially for elder care and construction, just to extend the productivity of the humans they do have.
And they are opening up, which is historically very unusual for Japan. Their foreign worker population hit a record 3.5 million in 2025.
Korea is also using guest worker programs to prop up their SMEs, though they struggle a bit more with long-term integration compared to the U.S. immigrant tradition. But the point is, they have a coordinated national policy response.
Whereas the U.S. is flying blind. I go back to that validated insights report you mentioned. High school counselors firmly believe teens will keep enrolling in trades, but the entire report fails to mention the demographic cliff. The whole industry is just banking on a trend to beat demographics.
And that is a massive risk. Without the structural support of something like a Meister school or a PVU, the U.S. is relying entirely on individual choice to fix a macroeconomic crisis.
As the boomer generation retires, they are taking decades of specialized skills with them. And the Gen Z cohort coming up is just physically too small to fill that gap one for one.
Which means productivity is everything. The only solution, and this is what the sources on Japan make crystal clear, is that a smaller workforce must be exponentially more productive. You achieve that through extremely high-quality vocational training and technological integration. You cannot solve it by just throwing more bodies at the problem, because the bodies do not exist.
And the ultimate lesson from Korea's education fever is that pushing everyone to university didn't solve their economic problems. It created a massive mismatch. It gave them a surplus of generalists and a critical shortage of specialists. The labor cliff is basically forcing a harsh correction of that entire value system.
It's forcing us to reevaluate what actually makes a society function.
So to synthesize all of this, the cliff is clearly not just about empty dorm rooms in New England. It is a fundamental structural reshaping of the global labor market. And surging enrollment percentages in trade schools do not negate the shrinking denominator of actual human beings.
The contradiction of having exploding trade enrollment alongside a severe labor shortage is completely resolved once you accept the demographic reality. We are all fighting over a shrinking pie.
And the real victims of this cliff aren't just the universities who have to close a campus. The victims are the industries themselves. The shipbuilding, the construction firms, the precision machine shops, the backbone of the physical economy.
The places that actually build the world we live in.
Populations are shrinking. In much of the world, that is already locked in. Governments and societies simply must use the window they have, roughly 2 decades, to build economies that can function with fewer people, rather than wasting that time pretending the decline can be reversed with cash bonuses and patriotic appeals.
A reality check we all need to face.
5. We will catch you on the next one.